The mountain wind carried the acrid scent of gunpowder and something darker that Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had learned not to think about too deeply. Through the reinforced windows of Forward Operating Base Falcon's medical bay, she could see the SEAL team returning from their morning patrol, their tactical gear dust-covered and their faces wearing that particular expression of men who had seen too much before breakfast. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching as Chief Petty Officer Jake Mitchell led his team across the compound with the swagger of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what happened next would shatter everything these elite warriors thought they knew about courage, skill, and what it truly meant to be ready when everything falls apart. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one with the biggest gun or the loudest voice. Sometimes it's the quiet professional everyone overlooks, the one they dismiss as just a medic, until the moment comes when that medic picks up a Barrett .50 caliber rifle and changes the entire course of a battle with a single impossible shot. The morning sun struggled through the perpetual haze that hung over the mountains surrounding Forward Falcon, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted the medical crosspatch on her desert camouflage uniform as she made her rounds through the compound's medical facility, her boots silent against the polished concrete floors that she kept meticulously clean. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the underlying mustiness of a building that had been constructed hastily and maintained under constant threat of enemy contact. She paused at the window overlooking the compound's central courtyard, where the morning briefing was already underway. Through the reinforced glass, she could see the members of SEAL Team Delta 7 gathered in their characteristic circle, their expensive tactical gear gleaming despite the harsh conditions. At the center stood Chief Petty Officer Jake Mitchell, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from years of successful operations and the unwavering belief that he and his team were the apex predators in any environment they entered. Maria's reflection stared back at her from the window, distorted slightly by the ballistic glass. 5'6", compact build, dark hair pulled back in regulation style, and brown eyes that had seen more combat trauma than most people could imagine. But what her reflection couldn't show was the weight she carried, the knowledge that she belonged out there with those operators, not in here counting bandages and updating medical inventories. The medical bay was her domain now, a 20-by-30-foot space filled with state-of-the-art trauma equipment that she could operate with her eyes closed. 2 surgical tables dominated the center of the room, surrounded by monitors, ventilators, and enough pharmaceutical supplies to run a small hospital. Everything was organized with military precision, each piece of equipment exactly where it needed to be, because in their world, seconds could mean the difference between bringing someone home alive or sending them home in a flag-draped box. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, checking supply levels, reviewing emergency protocols, and ensuring that every piece of equipment was functioning perfectly. Her hands worked automatically while her mind wandered to the conversations she could hear drifting in from the courtyard. Mitchell's voice carried clearly through the thin mountain air, his tone casual but authoritative as he briefed his team on the day's operations. "Intel suggests the target has moved to higher ground," Mitchell was saying, his words carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to lead. "We'll approach from the North Ridge, use the terrain to mask our advance. Should be a standard recon and eliminate mission." Maria found herself analyzing the approach even as she restocked trauma supplies. The North Ridge was exposed to crosswinds that could affect accuracy at long range, and the terrain features Mitchell was planning to use for concealment would also limit their fields of fire if things went sideways. She had studied the topographical maps of their area of operations obsessively, memorizing every elevation change, every potential ambush site, every escape route that might mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. But her tactical knowledge was irrelevant now. She was medical support, essential but separate from the operators who carried out the primary mission. Her job was to be ready when they came back hurt, to patch them up and send them out again, to be the safety net that allowed them to take the risks that their missions demanded. It was important work, vital work, but it wasn't the work she had trained for, and it definitely wasn't the work she had dreamed of doing when she first raised her right hand and swore to defend her country. Through the window, she watched as Petty Officer First Class Ryan Torres joined the briefing circle. Torres was Mitchell's closest ally on the team, a lean, sharp-featured man whose eyes seemed to catalog everything around him as a potential threat or potential advantage. Where Mitchell was charismatic and confident, Torres was calculating and methodical, the kind of operator who never made mistakes because he never stopped thinking 3 moves ahead. "What about medical support?" Torres asked, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "If we take casualties in that terrain, extraction is going to be challenging." "Santos will be standing by," Mitchell replied without hesitation. "If anyone gets hurt, we call for the flying ambulance and she patches them up on the way back to base. Standard procedure." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The casual dismissal in his voice made Maria's jaw tighten involuntarily. Flying ambulance. As if her role was nothing more than sophisticated first aid. As if her extensive training and hard-earned skills could be reduced to applying bandages and calling for helicopter evacuation. She had heard variations of the same phrase dozens of times over the past 18 months, always delivered with the kind of benevolent condescension that somehow managed to be more insulting than outright hostility. What Mitchell and Torres didn't know, what none of them bothered to ask, was that Maria Santos hadn't started as a medic. 3 years ago, she had been Hospital Corpsman First Class Santos, attached to a Marine reconnaissance unit and carrying a rifle instead of a medical bag. She had completed the same advanced combat training as many of the SEALs now dismissing her, had earned expert marksman qualifications on 7 different weapon systems, and had logged over 400 hours of close-quarters combat training that had left her capable of neutralizing threats with either a scalpel or a rifle, depending on the tactical situation. Her path to medical support had begun during a joint training exercise at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado. She had been part of a multi-unit operation designed to test interoperability between different special operations forces, the kind of complex scenario that pushed everyone involved to their absolute limits. Her unit had been tasked with providing reconnaissance and target designation for a SEAL assault team, a routine mission that should have been completed without incident. But during the pre-mission briefing, Maria had noticed discrepancies in the intelligence package that didn't match her unit's reconnaissance findings from the previous day. The target building was supposed to be lightly defended, but her observations had indicated significantly more security presence than the official intelligence suggested. When she raised her concerns with the mission commander, Lieutenant Commander Paul Harrison, she was told that her unit's reconnaissance was incomplete and that the SEAL intelligence was more reliable. Maria had documented her observations meticulously, cross-referenced them with satellite imagery, and even requested permission to conduct additional reconnaissance to verify the intelligence discrepancies. Harrison had dismissed her concerns as excessive caution and ordered her to focus on her assigned role rather than questioning intelligence that had been verified by more experienced personnel. The implicit message was clear. She was a corpsman, attached to a reconnaissance unit, not an intelligence analyst, and her job was to follow orders, not to think. The mission had proceeded as planned, with the SEAL assault team advancing on the target building under the assumption that resistance would be minimal. Maria's unit had been positioned on an overwatch position several hundred meters away, tasked with providing early warning and emergency support if needed. Through her scope, she had watched the assault team approach the building, their movements confident and coordinated, their formation optimized for the light resistance they expected to encounter. The ambush had erupted with devastating suddenness. Instead of the handful of defenders that intelligence had predicted, the building had contained nearly 24 heavily armed combatants who had been waiting for exactly this kind of assault. The SEAL team had walked into a carefully prepared kill zone, their tactical superiority negated by intelligence failures and overconfidence. Maria had reacted instinctively, her rifle already trained on the building as she began engaging targets to support the trapped assault team. Her shots were precise and effective, each round carefully placed to disrupt the ambush and create opportunities for the SEALs to maneuver to better positions. For 17 minutes, she had provided covering fire that allowed the assault team to extract from the kill zone with only minor casualties, instead of the catastrophic losses that the ambush had been designed to inflict. The after-action report had praised the mission as a qualified success, noting that the assault team had eliminated several high-value targets despite encountering heavier than expected resistance. Maria's supporting fire had been mentioned favorably, but her pre-mission intelligence concerns had been characterized as excessive pessimism that could have undermined mission confidence if it had been given more weight. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had taken a different view. In his private assessment, Maria's questioning of the intelligence package had shown a lack of trust in the chain of command and an unwillingness to accept the judgment of more experienced personnel. Her performance during the firefight had been competent, but her attitude during the planning phase had been problematic. When she was offered the opportunity to attend advanced medical training and specialize in combat trauma care, Harrison had strongly encouraged her to accept, noting that her attention to detail and cautious nature would be valuable assets in a medical role. The recommendation had been presented as a promotion, an opportunity to develop specialized skills that would make her more valuable to future units. But Maria had understood the subtext. She was being moved away from direct combat roles because her willingness to question authority and her attention to uncomfortable details made her a poor fit for operations that required unquestioning adherence to command decisions. Her medical training had been excellent, comprehensive, and had given her skills that saved lives on a regular basis. But it had also effectively ended her career as a direct action operator, relegating her to supporting role that kept her away from the primary mission. Now 18 months later, she found herself at Forward Falcon, watching through a window as the operator she could have served alongside prepared for missions she could have helped plan, carrying weapons she could have operated with equal or greater skill than most of the team members. Her medical expertise was valued and respected, but her tactical knowledge was ignored, her combat experience dismissed, and her potential contributions reduced to standing by with bandages and morphine while others did the real work. The morning briefing was breaking up, with team members dispersing to their equipment checks and final preparations. Mitchell passed directly beneath her window, his stride confident and unhurried, his gear immaculate despite the harsh conditions. He glanced up at the medical bay window and saw her watching, offering a casual salute that somehow managed to be both respectful and condescending. It was the kind of gesture that acknowledged her presence while simultaneously emphasizing her separation from the real operators, a polite reminder that she was medical support rather than mission-essential personnel. Maria returned the salute automatically, then turned away from the window as the team began loading into their vehicles for transport to the insertion point. She had medical supplies to organize, equipment to maintain, and preparations to make for whatever casualties the day might bring. It was important work, necessary work, but as she listened to the sound of the convoy disappearing into the mountains, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was capable of so much more than anyone was willing to let her attempt. The compound fell into the familiar rhythm of a forward operating base during mission hours. Support personnel went about their duties with the casual efficiency of people who had learned to function normally while constantly aware that violence could erupt. Without warning, radio chatter provided a steady background soundtrack of position reports, weather updates, and routine communications that indicated the mission was proceeding according to plan. Maria used the quiet time to review her trauma protocols and ensure that her emergency response procedures were as sharp as her surgical skills. She ran through mental rehearsals of different casualty scenarios, visualizing her responses to gunshot wounds, blast injuries, and the dozens of other ways that combat could damage human beings. Her medical training had been thorough and ongoing, because in their world, being almost good enough was the same as being completely useless when someone's life hung in the balance. But even as she focused on her medical responsibilities, part of her mind remained tactical, analyzing the terrain around their base, considering approaches and defensive positions, thinking like the combat operator she had once been rather than the medical support specialist she had become. It was a habit she had never quite managed to break. This constant awareness of the tactical situation and her potential role in it if circumstances demanded her participation. She had no way of knowing that before the day was over, those tactical instincts would prove more valuable than any of her medical training, and that a Barrett .50 caliber rifle would become the instrument through which she would finally demonstrate the full extent of her capabilities to people who had spent months underestimating exactly what she was prepared to do when the situation demanded it. The mess hall buzzed with the familiar sounds of operators unwinding after a successful mission, metal trays clattering against tables and conversations, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. Maria entered carrying her standard meal tray, scanning the room for an empty spot where she could eat in relative peace. The layout was typical for a forward operating base, long tables arranged in rows with bench seating that encouraged the kind of communal dining that built unit cohesion among combat personnel. She spotted an empty section near the back wall and made her way through the maze of occupied tables, nodding politely to the various support personnel who acknowledged her presence. As she passed the table where SEAL Team Delta 7 had claimed their usual territory, the conversation volume seemed to increase just enough to ensure that her passing wouldn't go unnoticed. "I'm telling you, the shot placement was perfect," Mitchell was saying, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone recounting a successful engagement. "Center mass, clean entry and exit wounds, target dropped immediately. That's what happens when you have real operators making the critical decisions, instead of people who second-guess every tactical choice." Torres nodded approvingly while spooning what passed for beef stew in field conditions. "The key is understanding that combat isn't about following medical protocols or checking every possible variable. It's about making fast decisions with incomplete information and trusting your training to see you through." Maria continued past their table without acknowledging the comments, but she could feel the weight of their attention on her back. The conversation wasn't explicitly directed at her, but the timing and content made the intended audience unmistakable. This was how the dismissal usually worked in their world, not through direct confrontation, but through pointed conversations that established hierarchies and reminded everyone of their proper place in the operational structure. She settled at her chosen table and began eating mechanically, her mind processing the familiar dynamics playing out around her. The mess hall was more than just a place to consume calories. It was a social ecosystem where reputations were built and maintained, where stories were told that reinforced the established order, and where subtle but important messages were communicated about who belonged and who was merely tolerated. From her position, she could observe the various tribal groupings that naturally formed in an environment like FOB Falcon. The SEAL teams occupied the prime real estate near the center of the room, their conversations animated and confident. The helicopter pilots clustered at a table near the exit, always ready to respond if a mission required immediate extraction or insertion. The communications specialists and intelligence analysts preferred tables near the windows where they could maintain awareness of external conditions while conducting their informal information exchanges. And then there were the support personnel, the medics and logistics specialists and maintenance crews who kept the entire operation functioning, but who occupied the social periphery of the warrior culture. They were essential but not celebrated, respected for their competence, but not included in the informal networks where real influence and opportunity were distributed. "Santos, you got a minute?" The voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Chun, the base medical officer, who approached with the purposeful stride of someone who had important business to conduct. Chun was a Navy lieutenant commander, whose medical credentials were impeccable and whose political instincts had kept her career on an upward trajectory, despite the challenges of serving in a predominantly male special operations environment. Maria looked up from her barely touched meal. "Of course, ma'am. What can I do for you?" Chun settled into the seat across from her, her expression serious but not unfriendly. "I've been reviewing your performance evaluations, and I wanted to discuss some opportunities that might be opening up. There's a chance for advanced trauma training at Walter Reed, specialized surgical techniques that would make you one of the most qualified combat medics in the Navy." The offer was generous and would represent a significant advancement in medical specialization. Walter Reed was the pinnacle of military medical training, and the credentials Chen was describing would open doors throughout the medical community. But Maria found herself hesitating, sensing that there was more to this conversation than professional development. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity, ma'am," Maria replied carefully. "Can I ask what prompted this recommendation?" Chun's expression became slightly more guarded, the look of someone who was about to deliver news that might not be entirely welcome. "There have been some discussions about restructuring the medical support here at Falcon. Command is considering bringing in a physician assistant to handle the more complex trauma cases, which would change the scope of responsibilities for our current medical personnel." The subtext was clear enough. Maria's position at FOB Falcon was being eliminated, and the advanced training was being offered as a face-saving alternative to being reassigned to a less prestigious posting. It was a classic military bureaucratic maneuver, dressed up as an opportunity, but fundamentally about moving personnel who didn't quite fit the desired organizational structure. "I see," Maria said evenly. "And this restructuring is based on operational requirements or other considerations." Chun shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that she was navigating sensitive territory. "There have been some concerns raised about having medical personnel who might be overqualified for their current assignments. The feeling is that someone with your background might be better utilized in a more specialized medical role rather than general trauma support." Maria felt the familiar burning sensation in her chest that always accompanied these kinds of conversations. Overqualified was military speak for problematic, a polite way of saying that her tactical knowledge and combat experience made the command structure uncomfortable. They wanted medics who focused exclusively on medical issues, not personnel who might offer tactical insights or question operational decisions based on their own combat experience. From across the mess hall, she could hear Mitchell's voice rising as he entertained his teammates with another war story. "The thing about combat medicine is knowing your role and staying in your lane. You patch people up, you don't try to run the mission. Some people never figure that out." The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Chun noticed Maria's attention drift toward the seal table and followed her gaze, her expression becoming even more uncomfortable. "Look, Santos, you're an exceptional medic, and this training opportunity would set you up for a tremendous career in military medicine. But there are also considerations about unit cohesion and maintaining clear role definitions in a special operations environment." Maria understood perfectly. The offer wasn't really about her medical career. It was about removing a source of tension within the command structure. Her presence at FOB Falcon represented a challenge to the established order, not because she was incompetent or insubordinate, but because her qualifications and experience raised uncomfortable questions about the arbitrary nature of role assignments and the politics that determined who was allowed to participate in primary missions. "Can I have some time to consider the offer?" Maria asked, though she already knew what her answer would be. "Of course," Chun replied, relief evident in her voice. "Take all the time you need. But I should mention that the training slots are competitive, and delaying too long might mean missing this particular opportunity." As Chun departed, Maria found herself alone with her thoughts and her largely untouched meal. Around her, the mess hall continued its familiar rhythms, but she felt increasingly disconnected from the community that surrounded her. She was valued for her medical skills but unwanted for her tactical knowledge, respected for her competence, but excluded from the opportunities where that competence could make the greatest difference. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being offered advanced medical training precisely because her non-medical qualifications made the command structure uncomfortable. They wanted to solve the problem of her tactical expertise by enhancing her medical specialization, creating clearer role boundaries that would eliminate any ambiguity about her proper place in the operational hierarchy. She thought about Lieutenant Commander Harrison and the recommendation that had started her down this path. At the time, she had genuinely believed that medical specialization would complement her tactical background, creating a unique skill set that would make her more valuable to special operations units. Instead, she had discovered that organizations preferred specialists who stayed within clearly defined lanes, and that her willingness to think beyond her immediate responsibilities was viewed as a liability rather than an asset. The conversation with Chun was just the latest iteration of a pattern that had been repeating itself throughout her military career. Whenever her tactical knowledge became inconvenient or her combat experience raised uncomfortable questions, the solution was always the same: more medical training, greater specialization, clearer role definitions that would keep her focused on her assigned responsibilities rather than the broader operational picture. But Maria had not joined the military to be a narrow specialist. She had enlisted because she believed in the mission, because she wanted to contribute to something larger than herself, and because she had skills and insights that could make a difference in the most challenging operational environments. The fact that those skills made some people uncomfortable was their problem, not hers, and she was growing tired of having her career managed around other people's insecurities. The evening briefing was conducted in the base conference room, a utilitarian space dominated by a large table surrounded by chairs that had seen better days. Maps covered every available wall surface, marked with operational boundaries, known threat locations, and the various reference points that made navigation possible in terrain where GPS signals could be unreliable and visual. Landmarks were often obscured by weather or enemy action. Maria attended these briefings in her capacity as senior medical personnel, responsible for understanding the tactical situation so that she could anticipate medical requirements and prepare for potential casualty scenarios. Her presence was expected, but not particularly valued, since her input was limited to medical considerations rather than tactical planning. Commander David Walsh presided over the briefing with the calm authority of someone who had been managing special operations for most of his military career. Walsh was a former SEAL himself, but his transition to command roles had given him a broader perspective on the complex coordination required to maintain effective operations in a hostile environment. Intelligence indicates increased enemy activity in the northern sector. Walsh began, using a laser pointer to highlight areas on the digital map display. We've observed movement patterns that suggest they're establishing new supply routes through the mountain passes, possibly in preparation for a coordinated offensive against coalition positions. Mitchell leaned forward in his chair, his attention focused on the tactical implications. Are we talking about interdiction operations or reconnaissance only? That depends on what we find, Walsh replied. Initial missions will be reconnaissance. Focused, but we need to be prepared for direct action if the targets present themselves. The terrain is challenging, with multiple escape routes and limited visibility due to seasonal weather patterns. Maria studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes and the natural choke points that would channel movement through predictable corridors. The area was familiar to her from previous medical evacuation missions, and she understood the tactical challenges that the terrain would present. The enemy had chosen their routes well, using geography to limit coalition options while maintaining multiple escape routes for their own forces. "What about medical support?" asked Torres, his question directed at Walsh but his glance including Maria in the conversation. "If we take casualties in that terrain, extraction is going to be complicated." Walsh nodded toward Maria. "Santos will coordinate medical support from here, with helicopter evacuation available depending on weather conditions. We're also arranging for a field hospital to be positioned closer to the operational area, reducing transport time for serious casualties." It was a reasonable plan, carefully thought out and properly resourced. But Maria found herself thinking about the tactical challenges that the medical plan didn't address. The proposed helicopter landing zones were exposed to observation and potential enemy fire, and the routes between the operational area and the extraction points passed through terrain that would be ideal for ambushes. The medical evacuation plan was technically sound but tactically vulnerable, and she wondered if anyone had considered the security implications of the medical support requirements. "Ma'am," Maria said, addressing Walsh directly, "have we considered the possibility that the enemy might anticipate our medical evacuation procedures and plan accordingly?" The room fell silent, with all eyes turning toward her. Walsh's expression was neutral but attentive, while Mitchell and Torres exchanged glances that clearly indicated their opinion about medical personnel offering tactical insights. "What specific concerns do you have?" Walsh asked, his tone professional but not encouraging. "The proposed landing zones are all in areas that would be easily observed from higher elevations," Maria explained, moving to the map display. "If the enemy establishes overwatch positions here, and here, they could effectively interdict our medical evacuation routes while remaining concealed until our aircraft are committed to landing approaches." She traced the terrain features with her finger, showing how the natural geography would allow enemy forces to establish killing zones that would make medical evacuation extremely dangerous. Additionally, the routes between the operational area and the extraction points pass through several natural ambush sites where small enemy forces could inflict significant casualties on medical evacuation convoys. Mitchell's expression had grown increasingly skeptical as she spoke. "With respect, Santos, medical evacuation planning is more complicated than just looking at a map. There are factors like flight time, fuel requirements, and weather considerations that determine where helicopters can safely operate." "I understand those factors," Maria replied calmly. "But I'm suggesting that we might want to consider alternative evacuation routes that would be less predictable and therefore less vulnerable to enemy interdiction." "Such as?" Torres asked, his tone suggesting that he expected her suggestions to be impractical. Maria had anticipated the question and had already identified several alternatives during her analysis of the terrain. "There are 3 potential landing zones here, and here that would be more difficult for enemy forces to observe, but still accessible to our aircraft. The routes are longer, but they avoid the natural choke points where ambushes would be most likely." Walsh studied the alternative she had indicated, his expression thoughtful. "These zones would require more complex navigation in poor weather conditions." "Yes, sir," Maria agreed. "But they would also be much more difficult for enemy forces to predict and target. The additional navigation complexity might be worth the reduction in tactical vulnerability." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tensions. Maria had offered tactically sound alternatives based on her understanding of the terrain and enemy capabilities, but she had also stepped outside her designated role as medical support and ventured into operational planning that was supposed to be the exclusive domain of the combat operators. "We'll take your suggestions under consideration," Walsh said finally, his diplomatic phrasing indicating that the conversation was concluded. "For now, we'll proceed with the original evacuation plan, but we'll ensure that alternative routes are identified in case circumstances require changes." It was a polite dismissal, acknowledging her input while making it clear that her tactical insights were not particularly welcome in the operational planning process. Maria nodded and returned to her seat, aware that her comments had created the kind of tension that would be discussed privately after the briefing concluded. As the briefing continued with discussions of equipment requirements and communication protocols, Maria found herself wondering why her tactical knowledge was consistently viewed as a problem rather than an asset. She understood the importance of role clarity and chain of command, but she also understood that combat operations were complex endeavors that benefited from multiple perspectives and diverse expertise. The real issue, she suspected, was not her competence, but her willingness to offer insights that might challenge the assumptions of personnel who were supposed to be the tactical experts. Her suggestions were evaluated not solely on their merit, but also on whether they reinforced or undermined the established hierarchy of expertise within the unit. After the briefing, as personnel filed out of the conference room, Maria overheard Mitchell speaking quietly to Torres near the exit. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Medical personnel who think they understand tactics better than operators who've been doing this for years. It's a distraction we don't need." Torres nodded in agreement. "Maybe it's time for command to clarify role boundaries more explicitly. Medical support should focus on medical issues and leave the tactical planning to people who are actually qualified to make those decisions." Maria pretended not to hear the conversation, but she understood the message clearly enough. Her tactical insights were not welcome, regardless of their accuracy or relevance, because they came from someone who was supposed to be focused exclusively on medical responsibilities. The fact that her combat experience and tactical training might actually qualify her to offer valuable insights was irrelevant to people who preferred clear hierarchies and unambiguous role definitions. The pattern was becoming depressingly familiar. Whenever she demonstrated knowledge or skills that extended beyond her officially assigned role, the response was not recognition or integration of her broader capabilities, but rather pressure to stay within more narrowly defined boundaries. Her tactical expertise was viewed as a complication rather than an asset, something to be managed rather than utilized. As she walked back to the medical bay through the dimly lit corridors of Forward Falcon, Maria reflected on the conversation with Dr. Chun and the advanced medical training opportunity that had been offered. The subtext had been clear enough: accept the medical specialization and abandon any pretense of tactical involvement, or face reassignment to a position where her broader qualifications would be even less relevant. It was a choice between professional advancement within a narrow specialty and the broader military service that she had originally envisioned for herself. The medical training was genuinely valuable and would open doors throughout her career, but it would also represent a final acceptance of the role limitations that had been gradually imposed on her since the incident with Lieutenant Commander Harrison. The medical bay was quiet and dimly lit, its equipment standing ready for casualties that hopefully would not materialize. Maria began her evening routine, checking supplies and reviewing protocols, her hands moving automatically through familiar tasks while her mind wrestled with the career decisions that awaited her. She thought about the tactical alternatives she had suggested during the briefing, wondering if anyone would actually evaluate their merit, or if they would be dismissed simply because they had come from medical personnel. The irony was that her Suggestions had been based on exactly the kind of detailed terrain analysis and tactical thinking that special operations units claimed to value, but apparently only when it came from personnel with the appropriate job classifications. The radio crackled softly with routine communications from the various observation posts around the base perimeter, a familiar soundtrack that indicated all was normal in their small corner of a very dangerous world. But Maria found herself listening, with tactical awareness, automatically processing the position reports and status updates that painted a picture of the security situation around their base. She wondered how long she could continue functioning in an environment that valued only a fraction of her capabilities, while systematically discouraging her from contributing everything she had to offer. The advanced medical training represented a path forward, but it was a path that required accepting limitations that felt increasingly artificial and counterproductive. The bureaucratic burial of her tactical expertise had been gradual but systematic, each incident and evaluation report creating a paper trail that documented her evolution from combat-capable personnel to specialized medical support. The process had been professional and appropriate according to standard military procedures, but it had also been fundamentally wasteful of human resources and operational capabilities. Maria understood that organizations needed structure and role clarity, but she also understood that the most dangerous operational environments required flexibility and the ability to utilize all available human resources to their maximum potential. The arbitrary separation between medical and tactical responsibilities made sense in garrison environments, but it could become a critical vulnerability when circumstances demanded rapid adaptation and creative problem-solving. As she completed her evening preparations and prepared to close the medical bay for the night, Maria made a mental note to review the personnel files and training records that documented her path from combat operator to medical specialist. Perhaps it was time to formally document the tactical training and combat experience that had been gradually written out of her official qualifications, not for the purpose of challenging current assignments, but to ensure that her full capabilities would be available if circumstances ever demanded their utilization. The mountain wind rattled the windows of the medical bay, carrying with it the distant sounds of a base settling into its nighttime security posture. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the perimeter, enemy forces were moving through terrain that she understood better than most of the operators who would be tasked with engaging them. But her knowledge would remain unused, relegated to supporting role that kept her away from the primary mission where her insights could make the difference between success and failure. Maria turned off the lights and secured the medical bay, then walked through the quiet corridors toward her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new missions and new opportunities for her tactical knowledge to be overlooked in favor of her medical specialization. But tonight, she allowed herself to imagine what might be possible if someone actually recognized that the most effective operators were often those who refused to be limited by artificial boundaries between different types of military expertise. The weapons range at FOB Falcon was located on the northeastern edge of the compound, carved into a natural depression that provided both concealment and effective backstops for live fire training. At this hour, well past midnight, the range was officially closed and supposedly empty, but Maria had learned that the night shift guards rarely patrolled this area with any consistency. The isolation made it perfect for the kind of training that she couldn't conduct during official hours without raising questions about why a medic needed to maintain advanced marksmanship skills. She moved through the darkness with the silent efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to be invisible when necessary. Her gear was minimal but carefully selected. Night vision goggles that she had requisitioned for medical evacuation purposes, a suppressed pistol that was officially part of her medical kit for personal protection, and a small bag containing the tools she needed for her clandestine training sessions. The range safety office was secured with a standard military lock that posed no challenge to someone with her level of training. Inside, She quickly located the weapons storage area where the various rifle systems used for training were secured. Her target was a Barrett M82, a .150 caliber rifle, a precision weapon that was primarily used by the SEAL teams for long-range interdiction missions, but which all personnel were supposed to maintain basic familiarity with according to base regulations. Maria had checked the training schedules and knew that this particular rifle was not scheduled for use until the following afternoon, giving her several hours to conduct her practice session and return the weapon without anyone discovering its temporary absence. She signed it out using her medical authorization codes, a privilege that allowed her access to weapons for training purposes, even though such training was not officially encouraged for medical personnel. The rifle was a magnificent piece of engineering, weighing nearly 30 pounds when fully loaded, but capable of delivering precision fire at ranges that exceeded the capabilities of most other small arms systems. Maria had trained extensively with similar weapons during her time with the Marine Reconnaissance Unit, but those skills required constant practice to maintain at operational levels. The military axiom that perishable skills perished without practice was particularly true for precision marksmanship, where environmental factors and human physiology could affect accuracy in ways that were impossible to predict without regular training. She established her firing position at the 1,000-meter line, the maximum distance available on the base range, but still well within the effective range of the Barrett system. The targets were standard silhouettes, positioned at various ranges and angles to simulate the kind of tactical scenarios that special operations personnel might encounter in actual combat situations. The lighting was minimal, requiring her to rely on the rifle's advanced optics and her own ability to read environmental conditions in limited visibility. The first shot was always the most important, establishing the baseline from which all subsequent adjustments would be made. Maria controlled her breathing and settled into the familiar rhythm of precision shooting, her body automatically assuming the positions and postures that would maximize stability and accuracy. The rifle's recoil was substantial but manageable, and the scope allowed her to observe the impact point with sufficient clarity to make the fine adjustments that separated good shooting from exceptional shooting. Her target engagement followed a systematic pattern that she had developed during her reconnaissance training. She began with single shots at known distances, confirming that her scope adjustments and environmental calculations were accurate. Then she progressed to unknown distance targets, using the terrain features and optical ranging techniques to estimate distances and adjust her aim accordingly. Finally, she practiced rapid engagement of multiple targets at varying ranges, simulating the kind of tactical shooting that might be required if she were ever called upon to provide precision fire support in actual combat. The Barrett performed flawlessly, each shot falling exactly where her calculations indicated it should. But more importantly, Maria felt the familiar satisfaction of skills maintained at their peak level, the confidence that came from knowing that she could deliver precision fire under any conditions that might be demanded of her. This was the kind of training that separated operators from specialists, the willingness to maintain capabilities that might never be officially required, but which could prove essential if circumstances demanded their application as she worked. Through her training progression, Maria found herself thinking about the conversations she had overheard regarding the northern sector operations. The terrain features that she had studied on the maps were ideal for precision rifle work, with natural shooting positions that would allow a skilled marksman to control large areas and influence tactical situations from significant distances. The SEAL teams had excellent marksmen, but they also had limited personnel and multiple mission requirements that might prevent them from positioning precision shooters in optimal locations. The irony was not lost on her that she probably possessed better long-range shooting skills than most of the operators who would be conducting the northern sector missions, but those skills would remain unutilized because her official role limited her to medical support rather than tactical operations. The bureaucratic separation between medical and combat responsibilities meant that valuable capabilities were being wasted while mission requirements went unfulfilled because of artificial restrictions on who was allowed to perform which functions. After completing her planned shooting sequence, Maria carefully cleaned the rifle and returned it to the storage area, ensuring that no evidence remained of her unauthorized training session. The documentation would show that the weapon had been signed out for familiarization training by authorized medical personnel, a routine activity that would attract no attention unless someone specifically investigated the timing and duration of the checkout period. She made her way back to her quarters through the same dark corridors she had used to reach the range, her movements silent and purposeful. The base was quiet except for the routine sounds of security patrols and the distant hum of generators that provided power for essential systems. To any casual observer, she was simply a dedicated medical officer conducting the kind of additional training that was expected of special operations personnel, even those in support roles. But Maria knew that her midnight training sessions represented something more significant than simple skill maintenance. They were a form of professional preparation for possibilities that might never arise, a refusal to allow her combat capabilities to atrophy simply because her current assignment didn't require their application. She was maintaining readiness for missions that she might never be assigned, but which could demand every skill she possessed if circumstances ever aligned to create such opportunities. The next morning brought the usual routine of medical preparations and equipment checks, but Maria found herself paying particular attention to the tactical radio frequencies that connected her to the operational teams. The Northern Sector mission was scheduled to begin in the early afternoon, with insertion by helicopter, followed by several days of reconnaissance and potential direct action, depending on what intelligence was developed. Master Chief Tony Rodriguez found her in the medical bay during the mid-morning equipment inspection period. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran whose experience spanned multiple deployments and whose reputation for tactical competence was universally respected throughout the special operations community. Unlike many of the younger operators, Rodriguez had worked with enough different personnel in enough different situations to recognize capability regardless of official job classifications. "Santos," he said, settling into one of the chairs near her desk, "I wanted to talk to you about something that's been on my mind." Maria looked up from the inventory checklist she had been completing. "What can I do for you, Master Chief?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I've been watching you work for the past several months, and I've noticed things that make me think there's more to your background than what shows up in your official personnel file." The comment was carefully phrased but clearly aimed at drawing out information about her tactical training and combat experience. Maria had learned to be cautious about such conversations, since they often led to uncomfortable questions about why she wasn't utilizing those skills in her current assignment. "I'm not sure what you mean, Master Chief," she replied diplomatically. Rodriguez smiled slightly, the expression of someone who recognized diplomatic evasion when he encountered it. "Let me be more specific. Last week I was in the armory when you signed out a sidearm for medical escort duty. I watched you handle that weapon, and your manipulation was too smooth and automatic for someone whose primary training is medical. You cleared and loaded that pistol like someone who's done it thousands of times under stress." Maria realized that her habitual weapons handling had revealed more about her background than she had intended. Rodriguez was observant enough to recognize the difference between basic military firearms training and the kind of advanced manipulation skills that came from extensive combat-oriented practice. "I've had some additional training beyond the standard medical curriculum," she admitted carefully. "I figured as much," Rodriguez continued. "And yesterday I was reviewing the range logs and noticed that you've been checking out various weapons systems for familiarization training. The frequency and variety suggest that you're maintaining proficiency on systems that most medical personnel wouldn't need to know. The observation was accurate, and Maria realized that her training activities had been more visible than she had intended. Rodriguez had clearly been paying attention to patterns that indicated capabilities beyond her official role, and his question suggested that he might be leading towards some specific purpose rather than simple curiosity. "Is there a problem with my training activities?" she asked. "Not a problem," Rodriguez replied. "But I am curious about the extent of your tactical background, because there might be situations where that background could be relevant to mission success." The comment was intriguing, suggesting that Rodriguez might be considering ways to utilize her broader capabilities rather than simply documenting them for administrative purposes. Maria decided that honesty might be more productive than continued diplomatic evasion. "I spent 3 years with Marine reconnaissance before transitioning to medical support," she said. "Advanced marksmanship, close-quarters combat, tactical operations planning, and various specialized skills that don't show up prominently in my current personnel file." Rodriguez nodded as if her response confirmed suspicions he had already formed. "And that background was considered irrelevant to your current assignment?" "It was considered potentially problematic," Maria replied. "There were concerns about role clarity and maintaining appropriate boundaries between medical and tactical responsibilities." "That's interesting," Rodriguez said thoughtfully, "because my experience has been that the best operators are usually those who refuse to be limited by artificial boundaries between different types of military expertise." The comment suggested that Rodriguez had a different perspective on role limitations than the personnel who had managed her career development. Maria found herself wondering if he might represent an opportunity to demonstrate her broader capabilities in ways that would contribute to mission success rather than creating administrative complications. "Master Chief, can I ask why you're interested in my tactical background?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, apparently considering how much information to share. "The Northern Sector operation has some challenges that conventional approaches might not address effectively. The terrain is complex, the enemy capabilities are significant, and the mission requirements might benefit from creative solutions that utilize all available human resources." The phrasing was careful but clearly suggested that Rodriguez was thinking beyond standard operational procedures and considering ways to apply unconventional capabilities to tactical problems. Maria felt a familiar stirring of professional interest, the kind of engagement that she had been missing during her months of purely medical responsibilities. "What kind of challenges are you referring to?" she asked. "The kind that might require precision fire support from personnel who understand both tactical requirements and medical consequences," Rodriguez replied cryptically. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." Maria understood that Rodriguez was exploring possibilities rather than making concrete proposals, but the conversation suggested that her tactical capabilities might be more relevant to upcoming operations than anyone had previously acknowledged. The hypothetical framing allowed both of them to discuss operational concepts without committing to anything that might violate established protocols or role boundaries. "Hypothetically," she replied, "precision fire support requires understanding of ballistics, environmental conditions, target identification, and tactical coordination. It also requires maintaining those skills at operational levels through regular practice." "And hypothetically," Rodriguez continued, "someone with medical training might be better positioned to understand the tactical implications of various target engagement options." The conversation was moving into territory that was both professionally exciting and potentially dangerous from a career perspective. Maria found herself torn between the opportunity to finally apply her tactical skills in meaningful ways and the recognition that such applications might create exactly the kind of role boundary complications that had derailed her career development. Previously, "Master Chief, are we talking about actual mission planning or theoretical discussions about capability utilization?" Rodriguez stood up, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Right now we're talking about making sure that all available capabilities are properly understood and documented. What happens after that depends on how the tactical situation develops. As Rodriguez departed, Maria found herself energized by the possibility that her broader skills might finally be recognized and utilized in ways that contributed to mission success. The conversation had been carefully phrased to avoid any direct violations of established protocols, but the implications had been clear enough to suggest that opportunities might be developing that would allow her to demonstrate capabilities that had been dormant for too long. The afternoon brought increased activity as the Northern Sector operation moved into its final preparation phase. Maria could hear the helicopters conducting pre-flight checks, their rotors creating the familiar rhythmic thudding that indicated imminent departure. From her position in the medical bay, she could observe the loading of personnel and equipment, the final coordination between pilots and ground teams, and the systematic execution of procedures that would put operators into harm's way within the next few hours. SEAL Team Delta 7 moved through their preparation rituals with the calm efficiency of professionals who had conducted similar operations dozens of times. Their gear was immaculate, their coordination seamless, and their confidence evident in every aspect of their behavior. But Maria found herself analyzing their preparations from a tactical perspective, noting equipment selections and operational concepts that suggested the kind of mission parameters that would determine success or failure in the challenging terrain of the Northern Sector. Mitchell and Torres conducted their final equipment inspection near the helicopter loading area. Their conversation focused on communication protocols and contingency planning. From her observation position, Maria could see that they were carrying standard loadouts for reconnaissance and potential direct action, but she also noticed that their precision rifle support was limited to designated marksman rather than true long-range interdiction capabilities. The limitation made tactical sense for most reconnaissance missions, since precision rifles were heavy and required specialized ammunition that limited mobility and flexibility. But the Northern Sector terrain was ideal for long-range engagement, and Maria found herself wondering if the mission might benefit from precision fire support that could control large areas while remaining concealed from enemy observation and counterfire. Her radio crackled with the routine communications that indicated the operation was moving into its execution phase. Weather conditions were marginal but acceptable, enemy activity was within expected parameters, and all systems were functioning normally. The familiar cadence of operational communications provided a soundtrack that she had learned to interpret during her months of medical support duty, each transmission containing information about tactical conditions and operational status. Medical. Be advised that insertion is proceeding on schedule, came the voice of the helicopter pilot. Weather conditions at the landing zone are acceptable, and we have no indications of enemy activity in the immediate area. Maria acknowledged the transmission and began her own preparations for potential medical support requirements. If casualties occurred during the insertion phase, she would need to coordinate helicopter evacuation and provide advanced trauma care during transport to more comprehensive medical facilities. Her medical equipment was prepared and ready, but she found herself thinking more about the tactical implications of the mission than the medical contingencies that might arise. The hours passed slowly as the operation developed according to plan. Radio communications indicated that the SEAL team had successfully inserted and was moving toward their initial reconnaissance objectives without encountering significant enemy resistance. The terrain was challenging but navigable, and weather conditions remained within acceptable parameters for continued operations. But as evening approached, the tactical situation began to change in ways that would test everyone's assumptions about role boundaries and capability utilization. The radio crackled with increased urgency as the team reported contact with enemy forces in positions that had not been identified during pre-mission intelligence preparation. Base. This is Team Leader. came Mitchell's voice through the communications system, his tone controlled but tense. "We have visual on approximately 24 enemy personnel in fortified positions overlooking our planned route. They appear to be equipped with heavy weapons and have clear fields of fire over the entire valley floor." The tactical problem was immediately apparent to anyone familiar with the terrain. The enemy had positioned themselves in locations that would allow them to control movement through the valley while remaining protected from direct assault by conventional small unit tactics. The SEAL team was effectively pinned in place, unable to advance without exposing themselves to devastating fire from positions that they could not directly assault with their current personnel and equipment. Commander Walsh's voice came through the radio with the calm authority of someone who had managed similar tactical challenges throughout his career. "Team leader, can you identify alternative routes that would bypass the enemy positions?" "Negative," Mitchell replied after a pause. "The terrain channels all movement through this valley, and the enemy positions provide overlapping fields of fire over any possible route. We're going to need indirect fire support or airstrikes to neutralize those positions before we can continue the mission." The problem was that indirect fire support was not immediately available, and airstrikes required weather conditions that were rapidly deteriorating as the mountain winds increased and cloud cover thickened. The SEAL team was facing a tactical situation that their standard equipment and procedures were not optimized to address, and conventional solutions might not be available within the time frame required for mission success. Maria found herself analyzing the tactical problem from her position in the medical bay, her mind automatically processing the terrain features and engagement options that would be available to properly equipped precision shooters. The enemy positions that were controlling the valley could be engaged from several concealed locations that would be invisible from their current positions. But such engagement would require precision fire capabilities that exceeded the range and accuracy of the weapons currently available to the SEAL team. The radio crackled again with increasing urgency as the tactical situation continued to develop. "Base, this is team leader. Enemy activity is increasing, and we have indications that they may be calling for reinforcements. If we're going to neutralize these positions, we need to act within the next few hours before the tactical situation becomes untenable." Commander Walsh's response reflected the limited options available through conventional channels. "Team leader, we're working on air support and indirect fire options, but weather conditions are complicating both approaches. Stand by for further instructions." As the tactical situation deteriorated and conventional solutions proved increasingly unavailable, Maria realized that the hypothetical conversation with Master Chief Rodriguez might be about to become very real indeed. The Northern Sector operation was developing into exactly the kind of complex tactical problem that required creative solutions and the utilization of all available capabilities, regardless of administrative boundaries or role limitations. The moment that would test everything she had trained for was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated, and the arbitrary separation between medical and tactical responsibilities was about to become a luxury that the mission could no longer afford. The emergency alarm pierced through the evening calm at FOB Falcon with the distinctive pattern that indicated an immediate tactical crisis requiring all available personnel. Maria dropped the medical supply inventory she had been conducting and moved toward the command center, her training automatically shifting her mindset from routine medical support to emergency response protocols. The urgency in the alarm sequence suggested that the Northern Sector operation had encountered complications that exceeded standard contingency planning. Commander Walsh stood at the central communications console, his expression grim as he coordinated with multiple radio frequencies simultaneously. The tactical display showed the SEAL team's position as a red dot, surrounded by enemy contacts that had materialized with devastating suddenness. What had begun as a routine reconnaissance mission had evolved into a tactical nightmare that threatened to become a catastrophic loss of personnel and mission failure. Situation report, Walsh called out as senior personnel gathered around. The command center. Team leader has encountered a reinforced enemy position that was not identified in pre-mission intelligence. Approximately 40 hostile personnel with heavy weapons and mortar, positioned in fortified locations that provide overlapping fields of fire over the entire operational area. Maria studied the tactical display, noting the terrain features that had allowed the enemy to establish such effective defensive positions. The valley where the SEAL team was trapped had natural choke points that channeled movement through predictable corridors, and the enemy had positioned themselves to exploit those geographical advantages with devastating effectiveness. Any attempt to advance would expose the team to concentrated fire from multiple directions, while retreat would require crossing open ground under direct observation and engagement. Master Chief Rodriguez approached the command center from the communications area, his face bearing the expression of someone who had been monitoring radio traffic that was growing increasingly desperate. "Sir, the team is requesting immediate fire support or extraction. They have wounded personnel and are running low on ammunition after fighting off 3 separate assault attempts." The wounded personnel report immediately activated Maria's medical protocols, her mind automatically shifting to casualty assessment and evacuation planning. But even as she began calculating medical requirements, she found herself analyzing the tactical situation that was preventing standard medical evacuation procedures from being implemented. The enemy positions were too well established and too heavily armed to allow helicopter insertion into the immediate area. "What about artillery support?" asked Lieutenant Brad Cooper, the base's medical administrative officer, who had joined the group gathering around the command center. Walsh shook his head grimly. "Closest artillery assets are 4 hours out, and the weather front that's moving in will prevent effective fire direction. Air support is grounded due to visibility conditions, and the enemy positions are too close to our personnel for danger-close missions, even if we had aircraft available." The tactical options were narrowing rapidly, and Maria could see the frustration building among the command personnel as conventional solutions proved inadequate for the developing crisis. The SEAL team was trapped in a tactical situation that required immediate intervention, but the resources normally available for such intervention were either unavailable or insufficient to address the specific challenges presented by the terrain and enemy capabilities. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, moving closer to Walsh so that his words wouldn't carry to the entire group, "there might be an unconventional solution available, but it would require utilizing personnel in ways that exceed their standard role assignments." Walsh looked at Rodriguez with the expression of a commander who was willing to consider any viable option when the lives of his personnel were at stake. "Explain." Rodriguez glanced toward Maria, then back at Walsh. "We have precision rifle capabilities on base that could engage the enemy positions from concealed locations outside their observation and return fire capabilities. The terrain provides several natural shooting positions that would allow accurate fire at ranges exceeding enemy weapon capabilities." "You're talking about counter-sniper operations," Walsh said, his tone indicating that he understood the tactical concept, but was concerned about implementation details. "Our designated marksmen are with the team that's currently trapped." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez continued, "but we have other personnel with precision rifle qualifications who could conduct such operations if circumstances demanded their participation." Maria realized that Rodriguez was referring to her capabilities without explicitly naming her, providing Walsh with the information needed to make command decisions while allowing plausible deniability if unconventional personnel utilization became problematic from an administrative perspective. The approach was tactically sound and politically careful, acknowledging realities while maintaining official boundaries. The radio crackled with Mitchell's voice, the strain evident despite his professional composure. "Base, this is team leader. We have 3 wounded personnel requiring immediate medical attention, and enemy forces are massing for what appears to be a final assault. We need intervention within the next 60 minutes or we're going to lose personnel." The desperation in Mitchell's transmission galvanized everyone in the command center. Walsh turned to Rodriguez with the expression of a commander who was prepared to authorize whatever actions were necessary to save his people. "Master Chief, brief me on these unconventional precision rifle capabilities." Rodriguez nodded toward Maria. "Staff Sergeant Santos has extensive precision rifle training from her previous assignment with Marine Reconnaissance. She's been maintaining proficiency on the Barrett M82A1 system and has detailed knowledge of the terrain where the team is currently trapped." The statement created a moment of absolute silence in the command center. Everyone present understood that Rodriguez was proposing to deploy medical personnel in a direct combat role, violating established protocols and role boundaries in ways that could have serious administrative consequences. But they also understood that conventional approaches had proven inadequate, and that unconventional solutions might be the only way to prevent a catastrophic loss of personnel. Walsh looked directly at Maria, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Santos, do you believe you can engage enemy positions at extended range in current weather conditions with sufficient precision to influence the tactical situation?" The question was direct and demanded an equally direct response. Maria had spent months maintaining capabilities that might never be officially utilized, and now those capabilities were suddenly mission essential rather than professionally problematic. The moment she had been unconsciously preparing for had arrived with stunning suddenness. "Yes, sir," she replied without hesitation. "I can engage targets at ranges up to 1,500 meters with the Barrett system, and I'm familiar with the terrain features that would provide concealed positions for such operations. Weather conditions are marginal, but within acceptable parameters for precision shooting." Walsh studied her expression, apparently evaluating her confidence level and professional competence. "What would you need to conduct such operations?" "The Barrett rifle system, appropriate ammunition, and transportation to a position that provides line of sight to the enemy locations," Maria replied. "I would also recommend a spotter with communications capability to coordinate with the trap team and provide target identification." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "I can serve as spotter and communications coordinator. My experience with precision operations would complement her shooting capabilities." The tactical solution was taking shape rapidly, but Maria could see that. Walsh was still wrestling with the administrative implications of deploying medical personnel in direct combat roles. The decision would establish precedents that could affect military organization and role boundaries throughout the special operations community, but the immediate tactical crisis left little time for extended deliberation. "Sir," Maria added, "the trap team includes wounded personnel who will require immediate medical attention once they're extracted from their current position. My medical training would allow me to provide trauma care during the tactical operation rather than waiting for separate medical evacuation." The observation provided additional justification for her participation, framing her deployment as medical support that happened to include tactical capabilities, rather than combat operations that happened to be conducted by medical personnel. The distinction was subtle but potentially important for administrative purposes. Walsh made his decision with the calm authority of a commander who understood that some situations required accepting calculated risks to prevent certain disasters. "Santos Rodriguez, you have authorization for precision fire support operations. Coordinate with the trap team and neutralize enemy positions as required to enable extraction." The authorization represented a fundamental shift in how Maria's capabilities were recognized and utilized within the command structure. After months of being limited to medical support roles, she was suddenly being tasked with direct combat operations that could determine mission success or failure. The professional validation was satisfying, but the tactical responsibility was sobering. Rodriguez was already moving toward the weapons storage area to retrieve the Barrett rifle and necessary equipment. We'll need transportation to the ridge position that overlooks the valley. Helicopter insertion would be fastest, but we might need to consider ground approach if weather conditions continue to deteriorate. Maria began mentally reviewing the tactical approach that would be required for successful engagement of enemy positions. The terrain features she had studied during her midnight training sessions were about to become operationally relevant, and her precision shooting capabilities would be tested under actual combat conditions rather than controlled training environments. Captain Mark Thompson, the base helicopter pilot, joined the tactical planning discussion with weather updates that would affect insertion options. Current visibility is marginal but acceptable for low-altitude approach to the ridge position. We can insert you approximately 800 meters from the optimal shooting position, but extraction will depend on how the weather develops over the next few hours. The plan was crystallizing rapidly, with each element of the operation being coordinated to maximize the probability of successful mission execution. Maria found herself at the center of tactical planning discussions that she had been excluded from for months, her input suddenly valued and actively solicited rather than politely dismissed. As she prepared her personal equipment and reviewed the tactical considerations for the mission, Maria reflected on the irony that her combat capabilities were finally being recognized only because conventional approaches had failed and desperate circumstances demanded unconventional solutions. The administrative boundaries that had kept her limited to medical roles had dissolved in the face of tactical realities that required utilizing all available human resources regardless of official job classifications. The helicopter insertion proceeded smoothly despite deteriorating weather conditions, with Thompson demonstrating the kind of precision flying that allowed them to reach the ridge position without being detected by enemy forces in the valley. Below, Maria and Rodriguez moved through the darkness toward their planned shooting position, their movements silent and coordinated despite the challenging terrain and limited visibility. The Barrett rifle felt familiar and reassuring as Maria established her firing position among the rocks that provided both concealment and stable shooting support. Through the advanced optics, she could clearly observe the enemy positions that were preventing the SEAL team from advancing or withdrawing safely. The range was approximately 1,200 meters, well within the effective engagement distance of the rifle system, but requiring precise calculation of environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory. Rodriguez established communications with the trapped SEAL team and began coordinating target identification and engagement priorities. Team leader, this is Overwatch. We have visual on your position and are prepared to provide precision fire support. Identify your highest priority. Targets for engagement. Mitchell's response carried a mixture of relief and disbelief. Overwatch. Priority targets are the mortar position on the northern ridge and the heavy machine gun emplacement controlling the valley floor. Be advised that we have personnel approximately 200 meters from those positions. The tactical challenge was immediately apparent. Maria would need to engage enemy positions with sufficient precision to neutralize the threats while ensuring that her fire did not endanger the friendly personnel who were operating in close proximity to the targets. The margin for error was minimal, requiring shooting accuracy that exceeded even the demanding standards of precision rifle training. She settled into the familiar rhythm of precision shooting, her breathing controlled and her position optimized for maximum stability. The first target was the mortar position, which represented the greatest threat to both the trap team and potential evacuation helicopters. Through her scope, she could clearly observe the enemy personnel operating the weapon, their movements efficient and coordinated as they prepared for what appeared to be a concentrated bombardment of the SEAL team's position. The shot broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil substantial but manageable. Through the scope, Maria observed the impact and immediately began engaging the secondary targets around the mortar position, before they could react to the sudden loss of their primary weapon. Her shooting was systematic and devastating. Round precisely placed to neutralize threats while minimizing collateral damage to equipment that might provide intelligence value if recovered. Target neutralized, Rodriguez reported to the trap team. Mortar position is eliminated, moving to secondary targets. The heavy machine gun emplacement required a different approach, since the weapon crew was partially protected by fortified positions that limited target exposure. Maria analyzed the tactical geometry and identified angles of engagement that would allow her to neutralize the threats without exposing herself to return fire from other enemy positions. Her second series of shots was equally effective, systematically, eliminating the machine gun crew and several supporting personnel who had attempted to maintain the weapon system. The precision and speed of her engagement clearly surprised the enemy forces, who began seeking cover and attempting to locate the source of fire that was systematically destroying their defensive positions. Secondary target neutralized, Rodriguez reported. Enemy forces are attempting to locate our position, but appear confused about the direction of engagement. Mitchell's voice carried excitement and relief as the tactical situation shifted dramatically in favor of the trap team. Overwatch, outstanding shooting. We are able to advance and will begin movement toward extraction position immediately. But even as the immediate tactical crisis was being resolved, Maria continued engaging targets that threatened the team's withdrawal route. Her shooting was methodical and professional, each engagement carefully planned to maximum effect while conserving ammunition and maintaining concealment from enemy counter-sniper efforts. The operation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Maria providing continuous precision fire support that allowed the SEAL team to extract their wounded personnel and move to positions where helicopter evacuation would be possible. Her accuracy was flawless throughout the engagement, with every shot achieving its intended effect and contributing to mission success. When the extraction helicopter finally lifted off with the recovered team and their wounded personnel safely aboard, Maria experienced a satisfaction that exceeded any professional recognition she had previously received. She had proven that her capabilities extended far beyond medical support and that her tactical training remained operationally relevant. Despite months of administrative dismissal, the return to FOB Falcon was subdued but triumphant, with the successful completion of an impossible mission that had required the kind of unconventional thinking and capability utilization that special operations units claim to value but rarely implemented. Maria had demonstrated that artificial boundaries between medical and tactical responsibilities were counterproductive when tactical situations demanded creative solutions. Commander Walsh was waiting at the helicopter landing pad when they returned, his expression reflecting both relief at the successful mission completion and awareness of the administrative complications that would follow from deploying medical personnel in direct combat roles. But his first words were focused on mission success rather than administrative concerns. "Outstanding work," he said simply. "Both of you." That operation saved lives and demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptability that makes special operations effective. The debrief that followed was comprehensive and professional, with every aspect of the mission analyzed for lessons learned and future application. Maria's shooting was documented with clinical precision, establishing a record of accuracy that exceeded the performance standards of most designated precision rifle specialists. But more importantly, the mission demonstrated that role flexibility and creative problem-solving were more valuable than rigid adherence to administrative boundaries. Mitchell approached her privately after the formal debrief concluded, his expression humble in ways that she had never previously observed. "Santos, I owe you an apology. I've been thinking about medical personnel as support rather than operators, and tonight you proved that my thinking was wrong." The acknowledgement was meaningful, not just because it came from someone who had consistently dismissed her capabilities, but because it represented a recognition that competence and tactical value existed independently of official job classifications. Mitchell's attitude shift indicated that the mission had changed perspectives rather than simply resolving an immediate tactical crisis. Torres joined the conversation with similar expressions of respect and recognition. "That shooting tonight was exceptional by any standard. You saved our lives and completed a mission that conventional approaches couldn't handle." The professional recognition was gratifying, but Maria found herself more interested in the operational implications than the personal validation. The mission had demonstrated that special operations units could be more effective when they utilized all available human resources rather than limiting personnel to narrow specializations that didn't reflect their full capabilities. Over the following days, the administrative response to the mission began to take shape. Rather than being criticized for violating role boundaries, Maria found herself being recognized for demonstrating the kind of operational flexibility that special operations units required to succeed in complex and unpredictable environments. The mission report emphasized creative problem-solving and effective utilization of available capabilities rather than unauthorized deviation from established protocols. Dr. Chen approached her several days later with news that represented a fundamental shift in how her career was being managed. "The advanced medical training opportunity is still available if you want it, but Command has also expressed interest in developing a new position that would combine medical and tactical responsibilities." The new position would represent exactly the kind of role integration that Maria had been seeking throughout her military career. Instead of being forced to choose between medical specialization and tactical application, she would be able to develop both skill sets in ways that complemented each other and contributed to mission effectiveness. The position would involve serving as medical support for special operations teams, while also providing precision rifle capabilities when tactical situations demanded such support, Chun continued. "It's a new concept, but the success of the Northern Sector operation has generated significant interest in developing similar hybrid capabilities." Maria accepted the new position without hesitation, recognizing that it represented an opportunity to utilize her full range of capabilities in ways that contributed to mission success rather than creating administrative complications. The role would be challenging and would require maintaining expertise in multiple demanding specializations, but it would also allow her to serve as the kind of complete operator that special operations missions often required. Master Chief Rodriguez was reassigned as her tactical mentor and partner, their successful collaboration during the Northern Sector operation, having demonstrated the value of combining experienced operational leadership with specialized technical capabilities. Together, they began developing training programs and operational procedures that would allow other personnel to integrate medical and tactical specializations in similar ways. The broader implications of the mission extended beyond Maria's personal career development to influence how special operations units thought about role boundaries and capability utilization. The success of unconventional approaches encouraged commanders to reconsider assumptions about what personnel could accomplish when circumstances demanded maximum flexibility and creative problem-solving. Mitchell and Torres became advocates for integrated training that would allow all team members to develop broader capabilities rather than limiting themselves to narrow specializations. Their experience of being saved by medical personnel with tactical capabilities had convinced them that operational effectiveness required personnel who could adapt to changing circumstances rather than rigid adherence to predetermined role assignments. 6 months later, Maria stood on the same ridge where she had conducted her precision rifle mission, but this time she was training a new generation of operators in integrated medical and tactical techniques. The program had grown to include personnel from multiple units, all learning to think beyond traditional role boundaries and develop the kind of comprehensive capabilities that modern special operations required. The view from the ridge overlooked the valley where her career had been transformed from medical support to operational integration. The terrain features that had once represented tactical challenges now served as training opportunities for personnel who were learning to maximize their effectiveness regardless of their official job classifications. Her radio crackled with communications from the training exercise currently in progress, voices that reflected the confidence and competence that came from comprehensive preparation rather than narrow specialization. The operators she was training understood that effective performance required mastery of multiple disciplines and the flexibility to apply whatever capabilities were needed to ensure mission success. As she observed the training exercise developing below, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from dismissed medical support to recognized tactical asset. The transformation had required persistence and professional preparation, but it had also required circumstances that demanded recognition of capabilities that had been systematically underutilized by an organization that preferred clear boundaries to operational effectiveness. The Barrett rifle rested beside her, no longer a symbol of capabilities that might never be utilized, but rather a tool that represented the integration of medical and tactical expertise that had become the foundation of her military service. The weapon that had once been available only during unauthorized midnight training sessions was now standard equipment for missions that required the kind of precision and flexibility that comprehensive training could provide. The radio chatter from the exercise below indicated that the training scenarios were proceeding according to plan, with personnel demonstrating the kind of adaptability and cross-training that had become standard throughout the special operations community. The lessons learned from the Northern Sector operation had been institutionalized into training programs that prepared operators for the complex and unpredictable challenges of modern warfare. Commander Walsh approached her position, his presence indicating that the training exercise was entering its final phase. "How are they progressing?" "Excellent," Maria replied, observing the coordinated movements of personnel who had learned to think tactically regardless of their primary specializations. They understand that effective operations require comprehensive capabilities rather than narrow expertise. Walsh nodded approvingly, his expression reflecting satisfaction with the program development that had emerged from the crisis that had once threatened to destroy his team. The integration model is being adopted by other units throughout the command. Your mission demonstrated principles that are changing how we think about personnel utilization and operational effectiveness. The recognition was professionally satisfying, but Maria found herself more interested in the practical applications than the institutional changes. The operators below were learning skills that would keep them alive and mission effective in environments where survival depended on adaptability rather than rigid adherence to predetermined procedures. As the training exercise concluded and personnel began their post-mission analysis, Maria prepared for the next phase of program development. That would extend integrated training to additional units and operational specializations. The Northern Sector operation had been a turning point not just for her career, but for institutional understanding of how effective military organizations should utilize human resources. The Barrett rifle was carefully stored in its transport case, ready for the next training exercise or operational mission that would require precision capabilities integrated with medical expertise. The weapon that had once represented unauthorized preparation had become a symbol of institutional recognition that the most effective operators were those who refused to be limited by artificial boundaries between different types of military expertise. The mountain wind carried the familiar sense of equipment and operations, but now those scents represented professional satisfaction rather than frustration with unutilized capabilities. Maria had found her place in an organization that had learned to value comprehensive preparation over narrow specialization, and her influence was extending throughout a community that had discovered the operational advantages of integrated training and flexible role assignments. The transformation was complete, from dismissed medical support to recognize tactical innovator, and the lessons learned were being applied throughout a special operations community that had rediscovered the value of maximizing human potential rather than limiting personnel to artificial categories that reduced operational effectiveness. The Barrett rifle had been the instrument, but the real weapon had been the determination to maintain capabilities that others considered irrelevant, until circumstances proved their essential value. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.